My husband texted, "I'm stuck at the office. Happy Valentine's." But he was just 2 tables away kissing another woman. When I stood up, a strange man stopped me and whispered, "Stay calm. The show is just beginning." I remember the exact moment everything shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of quiet precision that only comes when something irreversible has already happened. The restaurant was dimly lit, the kind of place Robert liked, soft jazz in the background, polished silverware conversations kept just below a murmur. It was where people came to celebrate long marriages, anniversaries, the illusion of stability. I had been sitting there for nearly 20 minutes watching couples exchange small smiles across candlelight, telling myself the same thing I had told myself for years, that being late didn't mean anything, that work came first, that this was normal. My phone buzzed once. I didn't need to check it to know it was him. "I'm stuck at the office. Happy Valentine's." I read it twice anyway. Not because I believed it, but because I needed to understand how easily the words came to him now, how natural it had become to explain his absence without explanation. There was a time when I would have felt disappointment, maybe even a quiet sadness. That night I felt something else entirely. Not anger, not yet. Just a thin, creeping sense that something didn't align. I reached for my glass, took a small sip, and let my eyes wander, not searching, just drifting. And then they stopped. At first it was nothing more than a shape in the reflection of the window beside me. A familiar posture, a slight tilt of the head I had seen across breakfast tables and living room couches for nearly 2 decades. I turned slowly, almost unwilling to confirm what my mind had already begun to recognize. 2 tables away, Robert sat facing a woman I knew, Emily Rhodes. The recognition came before the meaning did. Emily, who had once stood in my kitchen holding a mug of tea, thanking me for helping her get involved with the local charity board. Emily, who had smiled at my daughter like she was someone worth remembering. Emily, who had looked me in the eye and said, "You're lucky, Robert seems like a good man." Now she was leaning forward close enough that their voices never had to rise. His hand rested near hers, not touching at first, just close enough to suggest the possibility. Then, without hesitation, he closed the distance. He kissed her. Not quickly, not guiltily. There was no glance around the room, no instinct to check who might be watching. It was practiced comfortable, as if the space between them had been crossed many times before. Something inside me didn't break, it stilled. Completely. The noise of the restaurant faded, the music dissolved into something distant, and all that remained was the clarity of what I was seeing. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was quiet, but it felt loud in my own body, like the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to stop. I took a step forward, my mind already forming the words I would say, the questions I would demand answers to. And then a hand closed gently but firmly around my arm. "Don't." The voice was low, controlled, not urgent but certain. I turned instinctively, pulling back, but not hard enough to break free. The man standing beside me wasn't someone I recognized. Mid-50s, maybe early 60s, with the kind of presence that suggested he had learned to observe before he spoke. His eyes weren't on me at first. They were fixed on the table across the room, on Robert and Emily, with a focus that didn't belong to curiosity. It belonged to recognition. "Let go of me," I said quietly. He did immediately, but he didn't step away. "If you walk over there now," he said, leaning slightly closer, "you'll only see what he wants you to see." The sentence didn't make sense, not fully, but it stopped me anyway. "What does that mean?" I asked. Now he looked at me, and there was something in his expression that shifted the balance of the moment. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't guessing. He knew something. "It means," he said evenly, "this isn't the worst thing he's doing." I let out a short breath, something between disbelief and restraint. "My husband is kissing another woman in public," I said. "I think that qualifies." "You think this is about the kiss?" he asked. There was no judgment in his voice. That made it worse. "Who are you?" I asked. He glanced back at the table briefly, then returned his attention to me. Someone who made the mistake of not asking questions soon enough. That wasn't an answer. "I don't have time for this," I said, turning slightly as if to move again. "I know her," he said. That stopped me more effectively than his hand had. I looked back at him. "What?" He nodded toward Emily, his gaze tightening just enough to reveal something deeper beneath the calm. "I know her," he repeated. "And I know what she does to men like him." A pause settled between us, thin but heavy. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He held my eyes, now no hesitation left. "She used to be my wife." The words landed slowly, as if they needed time to rearrange everything I thought I understood about the moment. I turned back toward Emily, studying her again, not as a stranger, not even as an acquaintance, but as someone whose presence in my life suddenly carried weight I hadn't recognized before. "She was married to you?" I asked. "For 15 years, he said, until she wasn't." I felt something shift inside me then, not belief, not trust, but something more dangerous. "Possibility. And now she's with him," I said quietly. "For now," he replied. I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" He exhaled once, slow and controlled. "It means she doesn't stay unless there's something worth staying for." I looked at Robert again, at the way he leaned in, the way he smiled, the ease in his posture. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. "That what you're seeing," he said, "isn't the beginning of something, it's the middle." My chest tightened just enough to be noticeable. "And the end?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched Robert reach into his jacket and slide a small envelope across the table to Emily. She didn't open it fully, just enough to glance inside, and then she smiled in a way that had nothing to do with affection. It was recognition, expectation, calculation. The man beside me spoke again, his voice lower now. "He's not just cheating," he said. I didn't look at him, because I already knew I was about to hear something I couldn't ignore. "He's preparing to leave," the man continued. "And when he does, he's not planning to leave anything behind." For the first time that night, my heart moved just slightly, just enough to remind me that I was still inside this moment, not outside of it. "What has he already taken from you?" the man asked quietly. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. And that was the first thing that truly scared me. I didn't confront Robert that night. I left. Not in a rush. Not in tears, not in a way that would give him a story he could control later. I paid the bill, walked past his table without turning my head, and stepped out into the cold air like I was leaving any ordinary dinner. If he saw me, he gave no sign. If he didn't, that told me more than anything else could have. The man followed a few steps behind, but didn't crowd me. He waited until we were outside under the dim wash of the parking lot lights before speaking again. "My name is Daniel Hayes," he said. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it did, like he wasn't offering an introduction so much as a piece of context I would need later. "Linda Carter," I replied automatically, then almost corrected myself. The name felt different now, lighter in some places, heavier in others. "I know," he said. "That should have bothered me. It didn't, not yet." "You said she was your wife," I continued, folding my arms against the cold. "Start there." Daniel nodded as if he had expected that request. "We were married 15 years, divorced 3 years ago. The divorce was clean on paper." He paused, then added, "Not in reality." "What happened?" I asked. He glanced toward the building, toward the life I had just stepped out of, then back at me. She started suggesting changes, investments, new accounts, safer structures for the future. It all sounded reasonable, smart even. I trusted her. I trusted that we were planning something together. "And you weren't," I said. "No," he replied. "I was funding her exit." The words settled in slow and precise. "How much?" I asked. "Enough," he said, "that rebuilding took everything I had left." I studied him more closely now. The lines on his face, the restraint in his voice, the absence of exaggeration. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was telling me something he had already accepted. "That doesn't mean she's doing the same thing now," I said. "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." A pause. "But it fits." I shook my head slightly. "You're asking me to believe that my husband, someone I've been with for over 20 years, is not only cheating on me but quietly dismantling our finances with the help of your ex-wife." "I'm not asking you to believe it," Daniel said calmly. "I'm asking you to verify it." That landed differently. "How?" I asked. "Start with what you can access," he said. "Accounts, statements, transfers. Look for patterns, not events. No one moves everything at once. That's how they get caught." "They," I repeated. He gave a small shrug. "People who don't want to get caught." I let out a breath and looked away, my mind already moving ahead of me. Accounts, passwords, statements, I had access to most of it, but not all of it. Robert had always handled the larger financial decisions. It had made sense at the time. He was the one with the background, the experience, the long hours that supposedly justified it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because no one told me." I looked back at him. There was no self-pity in his expression, no attempt to draw sympathy, just a simple statement of fact. And because of that, he added, "I lost more than my marriage." Something in that sentence tightened my chest, not out of empathy but recognition. "You could be wrong," I said, though the words felt thinner now. "I could be," he agreed. "You could be projecting your situation onto mine." "I could be." "You could be trying to use me to get back at her." That made him pause for a fraction of a second. "I'm not using you," he said quietly. "But I won't pretend I don't want the truth exposed. For both of them." Honest again. I nodded, once absorbing it. "At least you're not pretending otherwise." "I don't have the energy for that anymore," he replied. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, just suspended. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "If I check and there's nothing there," I said, "this ends. You walk away and I go back to my life." "That's fair," Daniel said. "And if there is something—" He met my eyes. "Then you decide what to do with it, not me." I appreciated that more than I expected. I unlocked my phone, opened the banking app, and started with the account I knew best, the one we used for everyday expenses. Everything looked normal at first glance. Balances, transactions, nothing out of place. "Zoom out," Daniel said quietly. I hesitated, then adjusted the view from 30 days to 6 months. The change wasn't obvious. It wasn't supposed to be. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Small transfers, spaced out, consistent in their inconsistency. Different amounts, different dates, but all moving in one direction. Out. Could be normal, I said, more to myself than to him. Could be, he agreed. I opened another account, our savings. Same pattern. Smaller amounts, less frequent, but still there. My pulse began to tick up, steady and controlled. "Check something he wouldn't expect you to check," Daniel said. I frowned. "Like what?" "Retirement, insurance, anything long-term." I hesitated, then navigated to our retirement account. The numbers were still high, still reassuring at first glance, but the contribution history had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest something had been redirected. "Is this how it started with you?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "Exactly like this." I swallowed and opened the insurance file. It took a moment to load, another moment to find the section I needed. When it did, I stared at it longer than I should have. "Who's the beneficiary?" Daniel asked. I didn't answer right away. I read the name once, then again, as if it might change if I looked at it long enough. "It's not me," I said finally. "Who is it?" I lifted my eyes to his. "Emily." The word felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was saying something that didn't belong in my life, even as it clearly did. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "That confirms it." "Confirms what I asked, though I already knew." "That this isn't about a relationship," he said. "It's about an exit." I lowered my phone slowly. The pieces were starting to connect now, not perfectly, but enough to form a shape I couldn't ignore. The late nights, the controlled explanations, the subtle distance that had grown over the past year, disguised as stress, as work, as responsibility. I thought back to that envelope on the table, the way Emily had looked at it, not with affection, but with interest. "This has been going on for a while," I said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And I didn't see any of it." "No," he said. "You weren't supposed to." I let that sit. Not as an accusation. As a fact. "What happens next?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched me instead, as if trying to gauge something deeper than the question itself. "That depends on what you want," he said finally. "I want the truth," I replied. "Then don't confront him," he said. "Not yet. If you do, he'll close everything you're just starting to see." "And if I don't?" "Then you learn how far it goes," he said, "and you decide where it ends." I nodded slowly. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't panic anymore. It was focus. "Okay," I said. "We do this properly." Daniel studied me for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good." I slipped my phone back into my bag and looked once more at the restaurant behind us. At the life I had walked out of just minutes earlier. It was still there. Unchanged. From the outside. But inside, something had already shifted beyond repair. I turned back to Daniel. "Show me everything you know," I said. I didn't confront him the next morning. Or the morning after that. That was the difference between reacting and deciding, and for the first time in a long time I chose to decide. Robert moved through the house exactly the way he always had. Same routine, same tone, same casual certainty that everything in our life was stable because he said it was. He kissed my temple before leaving, picked up his keys, and mentioned almost as an afterthought that he'd be late again. "Quarter end," he said, like that explained everything. "It usually does," I replied, watching him instead of listening. He didn't notice anything different. That told me more than any confession could have. Because if there had been even a small crack in the version of me he expected, the one who trusted him, deferred to him, didn't ask too many questions, he would have adjusted. Slowed down. Covered his tracks more carefully. Instead, he left the house believing everything was exactly as it had always been. That was his mistake. By noon, I was sitting across from Daniel again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward him, showing him the transaction patterns I had found. He didn't touch it, just leaned in, studied it, and nodded once. "Layered withdrawals," he said. "Different accounts, staggered timing. He's consolidating somewhere else." "Can we trace it?" I asked. "Eventually," he said. "But right now, what matters is how much and how fast." I sat back. "It's not just one account, it's all of them." "I figured," he replied. I watched him for a moment, then asked the question I had been holding back. "How did you miss it?" He didn't flinch. "I trusted the wrong person," he said simply, "and I trusted the process. I thought if something was wrong there would be a sign big enough to force me to see it. And there wasn't. There were signs," he said, "just not the kind I was looking for." That stayed with me longer than I expected. Because I understood it. I had been looking for something obvious, a fight, a confession, a mistake. Something that would justify the feeling that had been building quietly over the past year. Instead, what I got was precision, control, and the realization that I had been excluded from decisions about my own life. "I need to know everything," I said. Daniel nodded. "Then you start with what he thinks you'll never question." Back home, I opened the files I hadn't touched in years. Retirement accounts, long-term savings, insurance policies, the parts of our life that had always felt too distant, too secure to require daily attention. The first numbers didn't alarm me. That was the point. They were still high enough to look stable, still structured in a way that suggested continuity. But once I started comparing them to older statements, the differences emerged not dramatic, but deliberate. Less growth, more movement. Subtle shifts that only made sense when viewed over time. I pulled up our daughter's college fund next. That one hit differently. The number was lower than it should have been, not drastically, not enough to trigger an alert, but enough to change what was possible, enough to shift options, enough to quietly reduce a future I had assumed was protected. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I needed to stay focused. I opened the medical savings account. Same pattern. Small withdrawals, regular intervals, no explanation attached. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. This wasn't panic spending. It wasn't carelessness. It was a plan. And every part of that plan had been built on the assumption that I would never look closely enough to see it. Memories don't come back all at once. They surface in fragments reshaped by new information. Robert studying late at night while I handled dinner homework, everything that kept our household running. Me stepping away from full-time work because it made more sense for our family. Conversations about long-term goals, about stability, about building something together. Except now it was clear. We hadn't been building together. I had been maintaining what he was slowly taking apart. "I built his life," I said quietly, the words settling into the room with a clarity I couldn't ignore. Not just financially. Structurally. Emotionally. And while I was doing that, he had been designing a way out that didn't include me. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, check the beneficiary on your life insurance again. Make sure it wasn't recently changed." I stared at the message, then reopened the file. I had already seen it. Emily's name. Still there. Still real. "It's her," I typed back. The reply came quickly. "Then it's exactly what I thought." I set the phone down and sat there for a long moment. Not moving. Not reacting. Just understanding. This wasn't a moment of betrayal. It was a structure of betrayal. Layered, intentional, and nearly complete. That afternoon I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through our physical records. Old folders, paper statements, documents Robert had once insisted on keeping just in case. I found what I needed faster than I expected. A secondary account. Opened 18 months ago. Not in my name, but connected. Indirectly. Transfers lined up perfectly with what I had seen digitally. Money leaving one system, entering another. And from there, I didn't need to see it to know. It was being moved again. Hidden. Prepared. When I met Daniel again that evening, I didn't need to explain much. I found it, I said. He nodded. Secondary account. Yes. How long? About 1.5 years? That's when it started. Then he said, I sat down across from him feeling something settle into place, not comfort, not acceptance, but direction. He was planning this, I said. Yes. For how long? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. Long enough to think he wouldn't get caught. I let out a breath. Then we make sure he does. That was the first time I said it out loud. Not as a reaction. As a decision. Daniel watched me carefully. You understand what that means, he said. This isn't about proving he's wrong. It's about proving what he's done in a way that holds. I know, I said. And once you start, you don't stop halfway. I'm not planning to, I replied. A brief silence passed between us, not uncertain, not hesitant, just the kind that comes before something shifts permanently. Then we do this properly, he said. I nodded. Yes, I agreed. For the first time, we do it properly. That night, Robert came home late again. He loosened his tie, set his keys down, and moved through the house like nothing had changed. How was your day? He asked. Productive, I said. He smiled, satisfied with the answer. Good, he replied. Things are going to settle down soon. I looked at him. At the ease in his expression. At the confidence that came from believing he was still in control. I'm sure they will, I said. And this time, I meant it. We didn't rush. That was the third decision I made, and maybe the most important one. Because rushing would have given him time to react, to adjust, to disappear behind whatever version of the truth he thought he could sell. Instead, we moved quietly. Deliberately. And we documented everything. Karen Lou didn't waste words when I first sat in her office. She reviewed the files I brought, bank statements, account histories, screenshots, printed documents, and organized them with a precision that felt almost surgical. This is good, she said. Very good. But it's not enough on its own. What's missing, I asked. Context, she replied. Intent, pattern. We don't just show movement, we show purpose. I nodded. I can get that. You already are, she said. You just don't realize it yet. Over the next week, everything became structured. Every transaction was traced. Every account cross-referenced. Every timeline aligned. Daniel stayed out of the room when Karen and I worked. That was intentional. He had given me the direction, the warning, but this part had to be mine. Legal control, documented in a way that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. At home, nothing changed. At least not visibly. Robert continued exactly as he had before. Late nights, casual explanations, small controlled conversations that never went deep enough to risk anything real. Things should calm down after this week, he said one evening, loosening his tie as he walked in. We're closing out a few things. I'm sure you are, I replied. He didn't notice the shift in my tone. He wasn't listening for it. That was the fourth mistake he made. 3 days before our anniversary, I made the calls. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Precise. Our children first. I didn't give them details, just enough to prepare them. There are some things you're going to learn soon, I said. I need you to trust that I've handled it. They didn't argue. They didn't push. Maybe they heard something in my voice that made it clear this wasn't a conversation, it was a statement. Then a few close friends. People who had known us long enough to understand what handled it meant. Dinner, I said. Anniversary. I'd like you there. No explanations. No context. Just presence. Robert was surprised when I told him. All of them, he asked. Yes, I said. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then smiled. That's nice, he said. Nice. The word lingered longer than it should have. The night arrived without tension. No storm. No warning. Just a quiet, controlled evening that looked exactly like every other gathering we had hosted. The house was warm, the table set carefully. Glasses aligned plates placed everything in its proper place. Familiar. Comforting. Deceptive. Guests arrived one by one. Laughter filled the space. Conversations overlapped. Robert moved through it effortlessly, welcoming attentive the version of himself that had built a reputation over years of consistency. If I hadn't known, I might have believed it. But I did know. And that changed everything. Dinner passed without interruption. Wine was poured, stories were shared, and for a moment it almost felt like nothing had shifted at all. That was the illusion. And like all illusions, it only held until someone chose to end it. I stood slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Before we finished tonight, I said I have something for Robert. The room quieted naturally, not out of concern but out of curiosity. Robert looked up, smiling. You didn't have to get me anything, he said. I know, I replied, but I wanted to. I walked toward him holding a small, neatly wrapped box. Simple. Controlled. Just like everything else that night. He took it without hesitation. That was his final mistake. He opened it casually, expecting something predictable, something that fit the version of me he thought he understood. For a moment, nothing changed. Then it did. His eyes moved across the documents inside. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The confidence slipped, just slightly, replaced by something tighter, more focused. What is this? He asked. His voice was steady, but thinner than before. You know what it is, I said. A pause. This doesn't. It does, I said quietly. I didn't interrupt him harshly. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing that for me. I looked around the room. At our children. At our friends. People who had seen our life from the outside and believed in it. Then back at him. I'm not here to argue, I said, and I'm not here to explain. Another pause. I'm here to make sure everything is clear. He swallowed the first visible sign that control was slipping. We can talk about this privately, he said. We've had years to talk privately, I replied. The room shifted. Subtly, but undeniably. I saw it in their faces, understanding disappointment, distance. Not directed at me. At him. For someone like Robert, that mattered more than anything else. This doesn't have to be like this, he said. I tilted my head slightly. No, I agreed, it didn't. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. You didn't lose me tonight, I said. I let the words settle. You lost the life I built for you. That was the moment it ended. Not when the documents were opened. Not when the truth was revealed. But when everyone in that room understood what had happened without me needing to say another word. No one defended him. No one interrupted. No one tried to soften what they were seeing. And that silence was the loudest consequence he would ever face. After the last guest left, I stepped outside. The air was still. Quiet. Daniel was waiting by his car. He looked at me once. You finished it, he said. I shook my head slightly. No, I replied. A brief pause. I made sure it couldn't continue. Robert didn't come home that night. He sent a message a little after midnight. We need to talk. I read it once, then set my phone face down and went to sleep. By morning, the house felt different. Not emptier, clearer. As if something that had been quietly occupying every room had finally been removed, leaving behind space I hadn't realized I needed. Karen moved quickly. The filings were submitted before Robert had time to regroup. The asset freeze went into effect within 48 hours. Accounts that had been slowly draining were suddenly locked in place, preserved long enough to be examined, traced, and most importantly, protected. He called again. This time I listened to the voicemail. Linda, he said, voice controlled but strained. This has gotten out of hand. We can fix this. Just call me. Fix this. The words sounded almost familiar, like something he had said in other situations, smaller ones, where a conversation could smooth over whatever had gone wrong. But this wasn't something that could be fixed. Because this wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And I had stopped it. The legal process unfolded the way Karen had predicted. Robert tried to reframe everything at first. Miscommunication, financial restructuring, temporary decisions taken under pressure. He used the same language he had used for years, measured reasonable, designed to sound like he was still in control of the narrative. But this time the narrative wasn't his. Every claim he made was met with documentation. Every explanation was answered with a timeline. Every attempt to minimize was countered with detail. Facts don't argue. They accumulate. And eventually they become impossible to ignore. Reputation doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. Robert learned that slowly. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations shortened. People who had once deferred to him began to keep a certain distance, not openly, not dramatically, but in ways that couldn't be misunderstood. For someone like him, that was worse than confrontation. Because there was nothing to respond to. No accusation to defend against. Just absence. I saw Emily once more. Not planned. Not expected. She was standing outside a building downtown, phone in hand, scanning the street the way people do when they're waiting for something or someone they assume will arrive. She looked up and saw me. There was no surprise in her expression. Just recognition. "Linda," she said, as if we were still operating within the same polite boundaries we had always maintained. I stopped a few feet away. Close enough to acknowledge. Far enough to remain separate. "You look well," she added. I almost smiled. It was exactly the kind of thing she would say, neutral, composed, carefully chosen. "I am," I replied. Her gaze sharpened slightly, recalibrating. "I heard about you and Robert," she said. "I'm sure you did." A pause. "You handled it strategically," she added. There it was. Not empathy. Not regret. Recognition of outcome. "You always were organized," she said. I met her eyes. "And you always knew when to leave," I replied. Something flickered in her expression, brief, almost imperceptible, but real. "I don't stay where I'm not valued," she said. I nodded. "Neither do I." The silence that followed was short, but it carried weight. Then she checked her watch. "Well, she said I have somewhere to be." Of course she did. She turned and walked away without looking back. And as I watched her go, I realized something that settled everything in a way I hadn't expected. She hadn't changed. Not really. She didn't need to. Because people like her don't build. They move. And for the first time, I wasn't something she could move through. The divorce finalized 3 months later. No courtroom drama. No drawn-out conflict. Just signatures. Decisions already made, documented, and enforced. Robert didn't fight as hard as I thought he might. Maybe because he couldn't. Or maybe because by then he understood something he hadn't before, that control only works when the other person doesn't see what's happening. Once they do, it's gone. I kept the house. Not out of attachment. Out of choice. That was the difference now. Everything in my life moved through that filter. Not habit. Not expectation. Choice. The flower shop wasn't part of the plan. At least not at first. It started with a class. Something small, something I had once enjoyed, but set aside because there had always been something more practical to do. Then it became something else. A space. A routine. A way of building something that belonged entirely to me. The shop wasn't large. But it didn't need to be. Morning light came through the front windows, soft and steady, the kind that makes things look exactly the way they are. People came in slowly at first. Then more often. Not because of advertising. Because of presence. Because people recognize something real when they see it, even if they can't explain why. And for the first time in years, that's what I was. Daniel stopped by occasionally. Never announced. Never intrusive. Just present. We didn't talk about Robert. Or Emily. Those parts of the story had already ended. Instead, we talked about ordinary things. Work books, the small details that make up a life when it's no longer defined by what's been lost. There was no expectation between us. No need to turn what we had into something else. Because not every connection needs to become a relationship to matter. Some people enter your life to help you survive it. And that's enough. One afternoon I stood behind the counter arranging a bouquet, white lilies, pale roses, something balanced and simple. A woman stepped inside and looked around slowly. "This is beautiful," she said. "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, Did you always want to do this? I paused, looked at the flowers in my hands, then back at her. Yes, I said. A small breath. I just forgot for a while. She smiled like she understood more than I had said. And maybe she did. That evening I locked the door and stepped outside. The air was cool, quiet, open in a way it hadn't been before. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle. Then I said something I hadn't said out loud until then. They didn't take my life. The words felt steady, certain. They just showed me it was never theirs to control. And for the first time, I believed it. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to think about what you've built and what you deserve to protect. Sometimes the truth doesn't break us. It clarifies us. If you believe in choosing yourself even when it's difficult, consider sharing this story with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, grounded, real, and deeply human, consider following along.